At some point, someone called you antisocial. Maybe they said it out loud. Maybe you said it about yourself, quietly, privately, after one too many times choosing to stay home instead of showing up somewhere that felt like it would cost more than it would give. Either way, the label stuck. And somewhere in the process of carrying it, you started to believe that your relationship with people was somehow broken. It is not broken. The label was simply wrong. And psychology draws a very clear and very specific line between what antisocial actually means and what you actually are, a line that most people have never been told exists. Understanding where that line falls changes not just how you see your social life, but how you understand your own capacity for connection. But before we get into where that line is, there is something that happens to deep thinkers over time when they carry the antisocial label long enough. Something that goes beyond social preferences and starts to affect something much more fundamental about how they relate to their own needs. We will get to that precisely. And when we do, it will explain something about your relationship with other people that has probably confused you for years. First, here is what antisocial actually means. Because the word has been so badly misused that most people applying it have no idea what they are saying. Antisocial, in the clinical sense, does not mean preferring solitude. It does not mean finding most social situations draining. It does not mean needing deep connection rather than surface-level exchange. Antisocial describes something fundamentally different. A pattern of disregard for other people's well-being. An absence of empathy. A tendency to exploit social situations for personal gain without concern for those around you. That is not you. Not even close. In fact, the profile is almost exactly the opposite of you. You do not lack empathy, you have more of it than most social situations have space for. You do not disregard other people's experience. You feel it so acutely that environments where it is shallow or performed leave you more depleted than energized. You are not indifferent to connection. You want it more genuinely and more completely than the word antisocial could ever accommodate. Here is the strange part. The people most commonly labeled antisocial in casual conversation, the ones who skip the party, who do not perform enthusiasm they do not feel, who go quiet in groups and come alive in one-on-one conversations, are often the people with the deepest capacity for genuine human connection that exists. The label was applied because their social behavior looked different from the norm. Not because their relationship with people was broken. The actual word for what you are, the psychological term that fits the real profile, is selectively social. And selective sociality is not a disorder or a deficit. It is a preference pattern with a specific and completely understandable cause. You are not avoiding people. You are filtering for quality. And the reason the filter is set so high is not that you have given up on connection. It is that you know, from enough experience to have learned it clearly, exactly what genuine connection feels like. And you have decided, consciously or not, that you would rather have none than have the counterfeit version. Most people completely miss this distinction. They see someone declining social invitations and assume the person wants less social interaction. But declining a specific kind of social interaction is not the same as wanting less connection. It is wanting different connection. And the person who stays home from the party is not necessarily someone who prefers solitude to people. They may simply be someone for whom that particular gathering offered a quality of connection so far below what they actually need that the cost of attending outweighed any possible benefit. That is not antisocial behavior. That is accurate self-knowledge applied to social decision-making. And this leads directly to something that reframes every social choice you have ever made that someone else read as withdrawal. Deep thinkers experience social interaction at a higher cognitive and emotional cost than most people. Not because they are fragile, because they are processing more of it. Where most people attend a gathering and experience the surface of it, the conversation, the warmth, the general social energy, you attend the same gathering and experience multiple layers simultaneously. The subtext beneath what is being said. The emotional dynamics shifting between people. The gap between the performed version of each person and the more complicated reality underneath. The specific quality of attention each person is bringing, whether they are genuinely present or simply going through familiar social motions. Processing all of that is not effortless. It requires cognitive and emotional resources that the event was not designed to replenish. And so you leave depleted in a way that most other attendees simply do not. Not because the gathering failed you, but because you brought more to it than the gathering was built to receive. Here is what most people never consider about why deep thinkers develop such a strong preference for solitude over shallow social interaction. It is not that solitude is inherently more appealing than people. It is that solitude is the only environment where the processing can stop, where you do not have to track the subtext, read the emotional dynamics, manage the gap between your full interior experience and the edited version of it that social situations require you to present. In solitude, you are simply yourself, unedited, unmanaged, not translating. And after enough interactions that required the full cost of translation, that simplicity becomes not just preferable but necessary. But here is where it gets really interesting, because this preference for solitude, this pulling back from social situations that cost more than they give, has a side effect that most deep thinkers never fully examine. Over time, repeated withdrawal from shallow social interaction starts to feel like withdrawal from social interaction itself. The distinction between avoiding small talk and avoiding people begins to blur. You stop going to things. You stop accepting invitations. You stop putting yourself in social situations at all, because the ratio of genuine connection to performative exchange has been poor enough for long enough that the whole category starts to feel not worth the cost. And somewhere in that process, a quiet loneliness settles in. Not the loneliness of someone who prefers to be alone. The loneliness of someone who genuinely wants deep connection and has stopped believing it is available to them. That is the thing I mentioned at the very beginning. What happens to deep thinkers when they carry the antisocial label long enough? They start to live into it. Not because they actually want less connection, but because the gap between the connection they need and the connection that has been consistently available has become too painful to keep reaching across. And that is the most important thing to understand clearly before we finish, because it changes the question entirely. The question is not how to become more comfortable with shallow social interaction. That framing accepts the wrong premise, that the discomfort is the problem and that tolerating more of what drains you is the solution. The real question is how to find more of the specific kind of connection that actually works for the way your mind operates. And those two questions lead in completely opposite directions. You are not someone who needs to learn to be more social. You are someone who needs to stop calling yourself antisocial when what you actually are is someone with a precise and well-developed understanding of what genuine connection requires, and an accurate perception of when a given situation is or is not capable of providing it. The people who will restore your belief in connection are not in every room. They are not at every gathering. They will not announce themselves. But they exist in larger numbers than your recent social history has suggested, because they have been making the same calculations you have, filtering for the same quality, and arriving at similar conclusions about the ratio of genuine to performative that most social environments offer. They are quieter than most, harder to find, and worth every draining surface-level interaction you sat through on the way to finding them. You are not antisocial. You never were. You simply know too clearly what real connection feels like to accept anything that falls significantly short of it. And that standard, however isolating it has sometimes felt, is not a flaw in your social wiring. It is evidence of how completely you are capable of showing up when the situation is finally worth it. Tell me in the comments, is there a specific type of social situation that drains you most? The one where the gap between what you need and what is available feels widest. I want to know where your particular version of this shows up most clearly.